Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to the Horus Heresy lore breakdown for Scars, presented today, quite fittingly, by Manscaping, which is not only a really goddamn good name for a male hygiene company, but also a product line that the White Scars would approve of with their fanciful facial hair. And today, we are presenting the Performance Package 3.0, including such wonderful offerings as the Weed Whacker. I gotta admit, I was a bit hesitant about this one to begin with, because for some reason, the idea of shoving a spinning piece of powered metal up my nostrils sounded, risque. Then again, though, you know that one hair, that one nose hair that just gets into the exact right position to be constantly ticklish and make you sneeze without stopping, yet you can never quite get to it. I do loathe that one hair. And so I figured that, okay, maybe it'll simply yoink them out of my head to considerable discomfort, or it'll tickle like mad, and yet, honestly, no, it's surprisingly comfortable. It doesn't tickle, nor does it tear the hairs out of your nose either. I'm actually rather sad I didn't get one of these before, honestly now. And it doesn't end there. There is also the Weed Whacker. The point of this thing is fairly self-explanatory, though it does have some very nice little touches, like, for example, a literal LED light. One of those little things that you don't really think of until, like, oh, hell, I can actually see what I'm shaving now. What a novel concept. You will also get two lovely little bottles, like, for example, this, of ball cream. Of all the things that you never really knew that you needed, ball cream is probably fairly high up on the list, and yet, once you start slathering the family jewels in non-chaff cream, kind of difficult to go back, honestly. And also, Crop Reviver, in case your family jewels have already wilted to a certain extent. If you act now, you also get 2 free gifts, including a boxer short and this lovely little traveling bag, presuming you're still allowed out of the house, in which case, good for you. There will be a link in the description down below with both the promo code and a link to the website, which you can check out right now. They also have a wide variety of other hygiene products as well available on their website, like, for example, the Shears 2.0. So, if you're interested in any of these hygiene products, definitely do give it a look, because they really are pretty damn good, high-quality products as well. Now, on with the lore. Chris writes Scars. This is an odd little book right here, because on the one hand, it is so guilty of being a furious abyss, a book that provides almost nothing to the wider story of the Horus Heresy, and yet at the same time, it's one of the only ones where we actually get to see the White Scars. The only other one is, it literally is just that short story, isn't it? Where a White Scars commando team shaves off little Horus Aximon's face? That's all we've had. Hell, the Iron Hands have had more prominence than that. Boy, that is tragic. You would think then that this would be a really important book for the Scars, and yet the problem is, the Horus Heresy series, particularly the first 3 books, met the challenge of the reader knowing what's going to happen. We all know that Horus is going to fall. We all know that he's going to turn a traitor, and we all know he's going to march on Terra. This is part of the canon that pretty much no one is going to be ignorant of, and yet still, the story manages to create a certain sense of suspense, where you're sitting there like, I know how this is going to end, and yet I'm really excited. Oh my god, is he actually going to resist the lure of chaos? It keeps you at the edge of your seat despite knowing that you won't fall off it, which is a very difficult thing to do. This book, however, again, we know that the White Scars are going to side with the Emperor. And so the only real way to introduce any kind of tension here is to try and pretend as if the White Scars were ever actually going to turn, which is ridiculous. The White Scars have no reason to turn. Even the reason that is presented throughout the book is basically that, oh, they're really independent-minded. Oh, right. Right. The independent-minded chapter will turn to chaos, of all things. I mean, I say that, but it's not a complete impossibility. After all, the World Eaters were like, we will never be slaves again, as Angron places the brass collar around his own neck. And oh god, the day I get around to making an Angron lore video. I hate Angron. I hate Angron's character to one hell of a degree. I mean, Lorgar I view as merely evil. Lorgar's simply just a bad person, and a bad person can be a good character. In fact, Lorgar as a character has a lot of depth to how his mind is twisted, the degree of doublethink he has to engage in to excuse his own inaction, to justify his own terrible deeds. I can dig that, but Angron's just a whiny little shit 9 times out of 10. That goes against his own express wishes too, repeatedly, but anyways, let's get off that topic and back onto Scars, shall we? As most truly evolved works of literature do, it begins with the brutal beating of a child. Though on this occasion, plot twist, that child actually kind of deserves the beating, as he had stolen 3 horses from the group of people currently walloping on him, and he had sold them all for a gulp of fermented milk and some belly meat. Feels like you got screwed here, buddy, but I don't know, the market price for horses. Nevertheless, I feel like this wasn't really a worthwhile trade, especially considering the aforementioned beating as well, but details. And it did turn out fairly well in the end after all, as the gang of grown men taking turns beating the 80-year-old boy are scared off by a giant man, in power armor, obviously, a stranger, that tells Tamu that he should probably come with him and not ask any questions. God. This is a dark start to the story, but it gets worse since, of course, the next scene is of yet another child. In fact, groups of children being abused in military training camps. Man. Right, well, let's just grit our teeth and continue on. The children receiving the abuse is Tamu, in the case of the kid getting his ass beat, and Haren, in the case of the one undergoing the harsh military training in the rain. The two are the exact opposite of one another, and this opposition is pretty much the entire plot, really. The telegraphing here is a bit on the heavy side, but I do like the idea of the contradictions. Tamu immediately embraces everything that it is to be a White Scar. Every neophyte is encouraged, and indeed required, to pursue one of the 3 higher arts. Most of them choose hunting, because, well, it's shooting things, isn't it? It sounds pretty much like what they'll be doing anyways. But Tamu chose poetry. And that apparently was a particularly highly valued art as well, and so he was repeatedly encouraged to continue to do so. Indeed, his sponsor, the guy who picked him up, Yasugai, takes particular interest in Tamu, and even aids him along in his poetic pursuits, saying that only poets can be true warriors. Yasugai, too, is a very high-ranking member of the White Scars, the very tippy-most top of the Librarius, so him taking such a particular interest in a neophyte is quite unique and interesting. On the other hand, Haren wants to be a lunar wolf. And here's the cool thing as well. Now, this thing I do like quite a lot. Again, the telegraphing is far too heavy-handed, but Tamu keeps repeating the White Scar's mantra. Withdraw, then return. Withdraw, then return. Retreat, then strike when your enemy is the least guarded. Meanwhile, Haren, who is of course aspiring for a very different kind of legion, has his own mental mantra: no backward step. You can see the conflict rearing up at you somewhat swift and brutal, can't you? But how's a lunar wolf going to get recruited by the White Scars? Well, you see, he's from Terra. He's from one of the mass training camps that create aspirants for the legions before they can begin recruiting from their own home worlds. Now, he's doing very well, our little Haren, but in the end of it all, he comes out 36th in his class. And the Lunar Wolves are accepting 35th and above. Whoopsie poopsie indeed. Though, to be fair, it's not that they're accepting it. In fact, they had marked him for selection, but since they weren't there to collect him immediately, and they had met their targets, now the legions had not. In other words, other legions had room, and the Lunar Wolves did not. He was denied his entry onto the shortlist, and was therefore assigned to whichever legion needed manpower, which turned out to be the White Scars. Haren was not fond of this, and even tried to argue that he wanted to please maybe not get reassigned. Yeah, no chance, son. And that is how a Lunar Wolves fanboy ended up in the White Scars. Some years later, and both of our aspirants have grown into full battle brothers. And they have taken new names as well as cutting themselves to create the ritualistic scars on their cheeks. Tamu becomes Shiban, and Haren becomes Torgun. And Torgun is struggling to adapt. Oh boy, is he struggling. Apparently almost all of the aspirants from Terra come from the Asian areas of the Earth, a detail that Torgun does not like at all, since the Imperium is supposed to be beyond all of that racialized nonsense, and yet the White Scars appear to disagree with that. The Terrans also struggle to learn the Chogorian language. They also seem to struggle with fully coming to grips with their tactics, their guerrilla warfare, the whole withdraw then return thing. Torgun also struggles with their apparent levity. The combat training is just as hard as previously, they expect just as much and just as much discipline, etc., but they seem to take a certain joy in it. One of his instructors told him that the warrior is the most blessed of creature, possessed with infinite might, and it would be courteous to acknowledge this occasionally, which Torgun views as boasting, essentially. In fact, even the woman assigned to teach them the language of the scars seems to have a little bit of a distaste for them. There is a lot of kind of like, oh, look at them barbarians over there kind of thing going on. And considering the White Scars themselves making absolutely no attempt whatsoever to be understood or accepted, that's hardly surprising. Anywho, Torgun does nevertheless commit himself to the deed. He trains as best he can. He tries to adopt their battlefield strategies, though he's constantly reminding himself a little bit as well. No backward step. And he's clearly not adapting all that well, but he makes the cut to his face, making sure to make it extra deep so that a Chogorian might approve of it. And eventually, he's collected by the Legion and brought into their ranks. Tamu, of course, who becomes Shiban, is overjoyed by the whole thing, and unsurprisingly doesn't have a whole lot of problems with anything, though even on the White Scar side, there is a hint of anti-Terran sentiment as he asks Yasugai if it is easy to fight alongside the Terrans, and Yasugai says, easy enough. As if to say, you know, they're not quite like us, they don't quite embrace our ideals and so on, but we're all in the same legion now, so we make do. And over the years, both fresh-faced initiates do quite well for themselves, rising in the ranks, in more ways than one. There's also an interesting little intersect here with one of the other books. I can't remember quite which one. I think it may have been a short story. Yes, I believe it was the one where the Alpha Legion infiltrated that weird little Alpha Legion platform thingy-bob, or whatever. I can't remember exactly, but there was a small scene there where Alpha Legionnaires were attacking and killing White Scars on a world infested by greenskin. And the story was specifically that they were there to extend the war, to keep the White Scars there for as long as necessary for the rest of the Great Plan to click into place. And here we are, with the White Scars embroiled in a war against Greenskin that somehow feels wrong. Like it doesn't quite click. The Greenskins are too tough, too effective. They seem to attack in all the right places. They seem to fade away wherever the White Scars try to strike at them. The entire planet seems actively hostile towards them. Lava flows suddenly breaking out, barring their advances, blocking their retreats, and so on and so on. And Shaban discovers a handful of White Scars' corpses, seemingly buried by one of the lava flows, except they have mortal wounds inflicted by, amongst others, blades upon them. And yet the rest of the corpse is intact, whereas orcs, of course, would desecrate the dead. This is awfully suspicious, isn't it? Yes, it is. And Shaban will want to see his suspicions fully brought to light, though he doesn't even quite know what it is yet. He just has this unsettling feeling that something is very, very wrong here. Meanwhile, Torgun is heading towards a lodge meeting. Because of course he is. Well, I guess that was somewhat inevitable, wasn't it? Particularly as it's not necessarily a Terran thing, though there are quite a few Terrans in the lodges. Apparently the number of Terrans have been dwindling drastically, and there are whispers that one day they will be in the minority and perhaps even completely excluded from the ranks of the White Scars. Again, the Scars seems to heavily favor recruiting from their own world, and whenever that isn't possible, they tend to recruit from their own kind, shall we say. We also get to hear a bit more from Yasugai, as he brings up memories of the gathering on Ulanor to try and introduce a little bit of doubt in one's mind, as he mentions that the only brothers that the Khan were really all that fond of were Horus and Magnus. Horus had apparently specifically asked the Khan if he could count on him when he needed him to, and the Khan had reportedly said, "You call and I answer." Yasugai also casts his mind back to Nicaea, where he had a heart-to-heart with Ahriman. Ahriman asked Yasugai to speak to the Khan, to do something, don't really know what, but clearly the Psyker problem had not been resolved to their satisfaction, and Yasugai himself seemed to simply just ignore the entire decree. As we will see later, he will use his psychic powers without any kind of restraint whatsoever because, well, silly decree. And apparently, his master the Khan agrees. The White Scars have not really disbanded their librarius in the way of the other legions. Again, this is to make us doubt a bit more, to think that maybe the Khan has more in common with the traitors than the loyalists at this point. And speaking of loyalists, the wolves are licking their wounds after their engagement with the sons of Horus as well. They have taken quite the beating after the revelations of the treachery occurred after Prospero, and Constantine Valdor has long since taken his leave of the fleet. In fact, he's all the way back on Terra already, which, that was quick, but oh well. Details. And Russ is, of course, absolutely furious, because he's also heard about what has happened on Istvan as well. And he's trying to figure out what the hell he's supposed to do next, wrestling with the fact that he now knows that he was, at the very least in part, used by the War Master to strike out against Magnus, to remove a threat against his ambitions, and hopefully, the War Master figured, they would tear one another apart, but sadly, Magnus decided to repent all the way at the very end. Though Bjorn is championing the cause of the wolves have nothing to be ashamed of. This was their orders, after all, except, they weren't their orders. Horus were the ones who sent those orders, but again, details, So it's a weird point of confusion there, but oh well. Russ insists that the fleet be made ready within 5 days for a return to Terra. Not because Dorne has summoned them, but because Russ needs to talk to the Emperor to figure out exactly what's going on and if there is a plan at all. He is, of course, unaware of the whole little nonsense beneath the throne room, which I guess Valdor did not feel it necessary to inform Russ of. Sure, why not? Dorne knows. We will be seeing a scene a little bit later where Malcador talks with Dorne and Valdor, informing them of the state of the silent war underneath the palace, and how it will eventually spill over into other areas as well, and how Dorne is now bound to not do a damned thing, even needing to keep the thing secret so as to prevent a panic. But to get back to the wolves for a second there, Dorne's idea of leaving within 5 days is, turns out to be optimistic, as he is not about to be given 5 days, as an Alpha Legion fleet, considerably larger than the Space War's own fleet, is detected at the absolute outermost edges of the fleet's sensor range by an Outrider ship. That is a big old problem right there, because, of course, the fleet's already beaten and battered and in no state whatsoever to take on a fresh Alpha Legion formation. But they are going to be given precious little choice in the matter. But more interesting is the conversation between Malcador, Valdor, and Dorne. Dorne now knows of the chaos unfolding underneath the palace, and is expressly forbidden to do anything about it, or to leave the planet in case the worst occurs. Which brings up the question, if the worst occurs, then what? Is he going to contain what the Emperor couldn't? Is he gonna evacuate the civilian populace? What's actually the plan here? Because I don't think there is one. I think Dorne just has to stay on Terra because, well, that's kind of how the story is written at this point, but, well, details. But they discuss the other Primarchs. Guilliman, what about him? Sanguinius, what about him? Have they turned? Have they been killed? And none of them think that either one has been murdered or been turned, certainly not the Angel or Guilliman. But then there is, of course, the matter of Jagatai, the Khan. Malcador is asked who the Khan was closest to, and he can only say, Horus, of course, and Magnus. Right. That does not calm them by any stretch of the imagination, but they decide to try and reach out to him nevertheless, hoping that if he could return to Terra, then maybe there is still hope. With Jagatai, with Dorne, with the wolves all gathered together, that would certainly be quite the force, one that might even give Horus pause. This also, incidentally, is the conversation in which the strange little mention is made where, what was it? Oh yes, Malcador mentions that he had warned the Emperor to make the Primarchs sisters, and that would make everything ever so much more harmonious and cooperative. To which all I can say is, have you ever known sisters? Because here's the thing, brothers might fight openly and violently, but that's usually resolved in a matter of days. When sisters fall out... Yeah, I don't think making them women would make them any less prone to rivalry or the occasional sniping and internal squabbling and hatred, Malcador. It's just such a weird line to put in there. Really, Malcador, you've never known a single female, have you? Okie dokie then. There you go. Then again, considering the way in which Games Workshop is currently going, I think we can already see the root of the comment, but details. Even as Mother Nature decides to underline the point with a little bit of thunder. Well, I'm gonna run and pull out my internet now, so if you don't hear from me for a month, you know what happens. But presuming we're still on track, we get to see a bit from the perspective of Jagatai Khan, as he is playing a game of Go against a logistical officer, which makes some interesting mentions. She feels that when Jagatai is trying to explain the benefits of his game over, for example, Regicide, he tries to make it sound more important, more complicated, better, more advanced. And she says, thinks, she wouldn't say that to Jagatai's face, that would be a silly-willy thing to do, that she often feels as if the White Scars are trying too hard to emphasize their cultural superiority, fearing that they are perhaps viewed as barbarians by the rest of the Imperium. And in almost the next breath, she also says that the White Scars don't really give a shit about Imperial edicts, and even if Yasugai indeed did fail to argue for the continued existence of Psychers within the legions at Nicaea, the White Scars would not care one itty-bitty bit about that, and would just continue on with their business as usual. Though at the same time, the Khan also professes that he is worried, he's unsure of himself, of his current position, of the Imperium's direction, and wishes to go back to their homeworld to pick up Yasugai, because he hasn't heard from him in a while. Presumably the White Scars don't have quite the same obvious level of interference and distortion that Yasugai is experiencing on the homeworld, because he knows that something is getting in the way of communications, and that the Khan would not have failed to call for him at this point. Clearly then, the White Scars themselves are a little bit conflicted as to what exactly is going on, probably as a result of the strange nature of the world they're currently fighting over, and how it seems as if the planet itself resists them. And on that note as well, a Legion apothecary has been brought down to investigate the strange White Scars corpses that were apparently left unmutilated by the orcs, and the apothecary, though being very careful to say as little as possible while still saying something, suggests that the knife wound is far more reminiscent of a Legion blade than that wielded by any of their current opponents. This being the time, it is, of course, the first assumption then is that they must have killed one another. There is a mention made that friction between the various brotherhoods of the White Scars is hardly a rarity. There's a lot of competition going on, absolutely. A lot of jockeying for position, for favor, for personal grudges and scores to be settled, etc., but never to this extent. Yet, well, they were the only ones in system, right? So it couldn't possibly have been anyone else, right? They do discover some items of interest, a detonation device that may have been used to collapse a lava passage, thusly burrowing the White Scars, but that doesn't really provide much more in the way of answers, does it? Did they bury themselves? A misplaced detonation? Were they buried by other brothers, perhaps? The only other thing discovered is a weird metal disc that Shaban does not know what is or what purpose it could possibly serve. It is simply just a weird medallion. A lodge medallion. Well, that certainly opens up some possibilities. Though, of course, poor Shaban has no idea what it is, but it is at the very least a clue, no matter how mysterious it may be. And speaking of mysteries, one is revealed as the White Scars receive news of heresy, of betrayal, committed by the Space Wolves against the Thousand Suns. And, I mean, if you word it like Horus did when he sent the communique to the Khan, that evil Leman Russ dude had attacked Prospero, well, it's not a lie, is it? It's just, leaving out some other pertinent details. And with the White Scars all riled up against them, it comes as even worse news, of course, that the Space Wolves are already engaged by the Alpha Legion. In fact, the White Scars will be asked to aid the Alpha Legion in fighting the Space Wolves. Not that they actually require the help, though, as the Alpha Legion seriously outnumber the Wolves, and they were ready and prepared for this fight. The Wolves were not, and they are being pushed back fiercely across the entirety of the battlefield. Even Leman Ross's flagship, the Hafnakal, is apparently crippled near the heart of the enemy flotilla. This, however, turns out to be but a ruse. Russ figured that if he made himself an inviting enough target, maybe his brother, or one of them, would come to have a little bit of a chit-chat, and Leman Russ could break him down into the submissive position and learn everything he wanted to know from him. Doesn't happen, unfortunately. I mean, even if Alfarius or Omegon were there, they're not really the kind of people who'd be like, oh yes, I'll board this ship. No, they'd probably just blow it the hell up, frankly. Though Bjorn does give us a slight taste of what could have happened if Alfarius or Omegon were mentally deficient, shall we say, as a group of Alpha Legionnaires who board his ship, primarily to provide us with a plot point, as it turns out, are defeated. And as Bjorn tries to squeeze some information out of him, he asks him almost pleadingly, why are you doing this? And the Alpha Legionnaire, in a moment of kind of sympathy, seems to want to tell him, but obviously he's not going to, so all he simply says is, or whispers, for the Emperor. Which makes a certain sense to us, but none whatsoever to Bjorn, of course, though, oh god, I could rant forever about the retardation of that entire... But I'm not going to. I'm not even going to mention the fact that the Alpha Legion, of course, instantaneously upon signing an agreement with the Eldar Cabal, then begin counterworking them as well, making the entire thing bloody pointless, frankly. All you need to know is the Alpha Legion are deeply goddamn confused. And now the Space Wolves are as well. It's only fair, I suppose. But let's get back to the Scars for a little bit, because there's a very interesting conversation between two of the more fascinating characters in the book. A White Scar by the name of Halgi, and an Imperial logistical officer whom the Scars have given the affectionate nickname of Sue. She is highly valued by the Scars due to her unique ability, her perfect recall, allowing her to draw up deployment data of any battle group anywhere in damn near the entire Imperium, and their exact complement at the exact time of the report arriving, just like that. Very valuable. Particularly to a legion like the Scars, because technically speaking, all Space Marines are capable of this, which would of course be an incredible feat for a human being, but the Scars don't actually care. That's the thing. The White Scars are very much so of the opinion that whilst speed, organization, and delivering the correct strike at the correct place as swiftly as possible is all very important, of course, they do so at their own pace. Which seems like there's something wrong here. Okay, so they're obsessed with speed, but they won't take a second to bother about the logistics of actually arriving in fighting condition? Okay, well, free spirits, I suppose. But it is in the interaction between Sue and Halji that we see something really interesting. As a side note as well, Halji is probably my favorite character in the book. Not because he's on screen, quote unquote, all that often, or because of anything particular he does, but because he eventually turns out to be on the opposite side of the argument as to whether or not the White Scars should remain loyal, and yet he never even gives a hint of this away. He comes across as the kind of classically convivial Astartes. You know, he hangs around Sue, he is her guardian, he is her attaché liaison, he is there to help and protect her. Except, despite all of his apparent camaraderie, when the chips are down, he views her as nothing more than a human. Nothing more than a cog in the machine, or perhaps that is too cold. He has a certain... I'm struggling to find the correct word for it. Disassociation with her. It's not that he doesn't care for her, doesn't enjoy her company, it's just that she's not Astartes. She's not one of them, and she should hardly have any say in their business. And, again, if ever she were to offer a critique, he would not care one iota. It would be like your cat suddenly reared up on its rear paws and suddenly started speaking to you and complaining about your sense of mathematics. You would probably dismiss it out of hand after getting over your surprise, granted. Halji's really cool, because that is the mindset that I imagine a lot of the Astartes have, treating the humans almost like pets, laughing at them, poking fun at them. Oh, isn't this an adorable thing? But they don't actually take them seriously. At all. But moving on from that, because I really do like Halji, but we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. Sue asks some rather probing questions as well. That's why I like her. They get into a conversation discussing the Space Wolves and whether or not they can truly believe that they've turned traitor. And Halji mentions that their reputation certainly does precede them, and he wouldn't necessarily be surprised. Sue detects a note of resentment in his voice and asks, "What was your problem with the wolves? Is it a Legion thing?" And he kind of lets slip that the Scars are, in Sue's words, almost a little jealous of some of the other legions, like the Space Wolves. Their reputation. They are the executioners, the wolves. Their characters overlap, kinda. The Scars are, a little bit barbarian-y, and the Space Wolves are a little bit barbarian-y, but they are by far the more famous of the two. It's interesting, because it also, of course, gels quite well with the scene previously with Sue and the Khan, where the Khan stresses the superiority of Go over Regicide, as if to kind of be like, no, totally, we're not barbarians, look at this cool thing we have. Which, considering the way that they kind of put themselves aside from the Imperium, keep themselves at an arm's length, is... well, it makes sense. They're almost a little tiny, kind of little itsy-witsy-bitsy bit, like a certain other grey armored legion and a certain petulant little bastard who feels that everyone should totally recognize his talent, but at the same time absolutely hard-nosedly refuses to demonstrate it to anyone. I do like that, though. It gives a little bit of more context to the Scars and why they have... they choose to alienate themselves from the Imperium, absolutely, but this alienation is also furthered by the fact that they don't feel like they quite receive the respect they deserve. Khan is also working himself up quite a bit over this as well. Being ordered to attack Arras does not sit very well with him at all, and he requests confirmation. But, what with the whole warp nonsense going on, confirmation is not particularly easy to come by. He keeps receiving communiques by the War Master, and now he's also receiving communiques from Terra, stating that no, it's actually the War Master who's the bad guy here. He's the one that's declared a rebellion, and you are to rush to Terra to stand next to Dorne and Russ in resisting him. Some interesting choices need to be made here. He asks instead that word be prioritized from Prospero. He says that he needs to know if Magnus is dead. And he recalls a conversation he had with Magnus discussing the upcoming trial of Nicaea, or at the very least, the vague beginnings of it. This happened at Ulanor, and they already then knew that something was brewing. They just didn't quite know why. And Magnus, of course, was very confident that the Emperor would never side with the naysayers, even though the Khan sensed a certain disturbance in him. Magnus also says something rather interesting in that he says that the Khan is gifted. And when the Khan denies it, Magnus simply says, "Oh, you're not gifted, are you? Whatever you say." Yes, considering what we'll see later on as well, I think it's fairly safe to assume that the Khan has some psychic talent. Whether he's unaware of it or chooses to hide it is unclear, but there's definitely something there. And it seems unlikely to be a simple ruse either, because if the Khan did have psychic powers, he'd probably be using them now as he's screaming at his crew and threatening his astropaths that they are going to get him some news, some solid confirmation now. Oh, woe be upon their backsides. And the Khan would soon have something else to occupy his wrath as the Alpha Legion arrives. And immediately set about being as annoying as possible. Very, very Alpha Legion-y, as they perfectly begin to mirror the White Scar's own deployment, almost as if they're not aggressing upon them, not necessarily provoking them, they just remaining inscrutably infuriating. And what's worse is, the fleet is bloody huge. If indeed the Alpha Legion are engaged with the Space Wolf Legion already, and now they've got a fleet the equal of that of the White Scars ready to blockade them, the Alpha Legion have hidden away a lot of ships somewhere, which they have now drawn forth from their capricious and quite clearly cavernous anuses. But the answer to that question is going to have to wait a little bit, as we are about to rejoin Yasugai. He has a very interesting memory. Or actually, let's start with the dream first, shall we? He has a dream. And he also makes clear to mention that the dreams of the gifted are never random. So he's entirely sure that this dream means something, he just isn't quite sure what it means yet. And that's probably a good thing, because the obvious meaning of the dream, by the way, being of the Khan driven to his knees and killed by some kind of shadow monster creature, Well, that's the kind of obvious meaning that probably, hopefully will be wrong there, yes. I can see why he'd be hesitant to believe the immediate interpretation of such a dream. He also says, interestingly, that he neither believes that the Khan is ungifted. He says specifically that the Khan told him that he was not gifted, and yet the way he moves and the way he fights tells him differently. So that's two people now that think that the Khan is being a little deceitful when it comes to his own psychic powers. But honestly, if Magnus already thinks so, then I believe the cat is already out of the bag on that one. More interestingly, is a conversation that Yasugai had with Ahriman, the two having been introduced to one another on Ulanor by their Primarchs. Yasugai apparently asked Ahriman if he believes that there is nothing bad, quote-unquote, in the Great Ocean. And Ahriman explains that, oh no, there's plenty of bad things out there, just like there is in the material world. You just have to be able to recognize it, to judge what is and isn't harmful, and so on. Reasonable enough from a scientific point of view, right? But Yasugai then asks him, you do not see the faces, the screaming faces. And he's struggling a little bit to explain exactly what he means, because apparently his mastery of Gothic isn't that amazing, but the gist is obvious. This is a common theme throughout 40k. Navigators see all kinds of horrors out in the warp. Monsters, grand eyes, behemoth creatures, screaming faces, etc., etc. Sights to drive a man mad. And Ahriman seems completely confused by this, and half-jokingly suggests that Yasugai must have been dreaming, because the warp does grant unsettled dreams. Now that is very, very interesting, because everybody else sees the faces, except for the Alpha Legion. Alpha Legion? Thousand Sons, goddammit. I do not want to know how many times I misspeak during these videos, as they are far more off the cuff than usual. But again, that is very interesting, isn't it? Because it does shed a great deal of light on how the Thousand Sons could be so goddamn ignorant, frankly. How Magnus could be like, oh, demon creature, save my legion. You won't backstab me, right? Well, maybe they literally didn't see. On the other hand, you could also argue that there are none so blind as those who will not see. So whether this was deliberate subterfuge on behalf of the gods, or the Thousand Sons simply wishing to look away from any uncomfortable things, is unclear. And unfortunately, Yasugai's memories are broken, as the ship he is aboard, as he has decided to go looking for his Primarch after not having heard anything from him for a while, is, well, encountering the usual nonsense around this particular period of Horus Heresy whilst travelling through the warp. Demons scratching at the hull and all of that nonsense, you know, the usual. And so the ship prepares to make an emergency translation into real space whilst not having the faintest bloody clue where they are. Well, I mean, it's better than being torn apart by immaterial monsters, I do suppose, if only mildly so. And when they do, or right as they are about to enter real space, Yasugai gets a premonition that they're not going to be alone when they emerge. But it's time for a brief break off from the White Scars to have a look at how the Space Wolves are doing. After Leman Russ's attempt to encourage Alpharius to face him in the open failed, Leman Russ withdrew his flagship, now, suddenly again, fully operational with void shields and weapon banks alight, out of the heart of the enemy fleet. It was... See, on the one hand, it was a bit of a silly ruse because there's no way Alpharius of all the Primarchs were going to face him, but Remember also, Leman Russ has done this before with Angron. He challenged him openly to a fight to prove a point to him, and so managed to turn him from his ridiculous path at least once. He kinda did the same to Magnus, except without the whole lesson thing. Leman Russ has a long history of challenging his brother Primarchs in an attempt to turn them, an attempt to teach them something. But in this case, Alfarius was not interested in being taught anything, of course. The rest of the Void War was going as expected as well. The Alpha Legion was fully rested, fully resupplied, and fully organized, and they had caught the wolves unawares. The wolves were losing, and they were only losing more badly every minute that passed. Russ eventually ordered the fleet to disengage and make for a local nebula, where they would attempt to hide until either something changed, the Alpha Legion left, or they found some sort of opening to break through. And that's when the interesting thing happens. Leman Russ asks himself, why are they fighting alone? Which seems like a ridiculous question. Well, you're out here all by yourself, you're surrounded by traitors, where's the nearest loyal legion you can even contact? And then suddenly he thinks to himself, Chondax, the place where the White Scars are located, is very nearby. And he says something very interesting. Jagatai Khan. How did I forget about him? That's a very interesting question. And it's one that's been popping up throughout the book, and one that honestly I didn't catch on to until like the third reading of this. Everyone forgets about Jagatai. How? How does anyone forget about a Primarch? About a legion of Astartes? Maybe that's his gift. Maybe that's the talent that everybody keeps talking about, that he continuously denies, his ability to go unnoticed, regardless of how ridiculous the notion seems. Because think about it, already, the idea of Space Marines forgetting about the White Scars is insane in and of itself. They have perfect memories. But a Primarch? One like Leman Russ engaged in a life and death struggle against the Alpha Legion with the White Scars nearby? How the hell would he forget about this? Now maybe it's just hokey writing to reinforce the otherness of the White Scars, or perhaps I'd like to believe there's something a little bit deeper to it. Interesting theory, if nothing else. But there are some that have not forgot about the Great Khan, the Alpha Legion amongst them, and also Yasugai. So the boarding action, or soon-to-be boarding action anyways, a Sons of Horus ship is barreling towards the White Scars vessel, the White Scars vessel, the moment they come out of the warp. They are hailing them, threatening them, ordering them to stand by and receive their boarders. A few volleys of lance fire is exchanged back and forth. The White Scars vessel, the smaller of the two, has its void shields popped, but it is not destroyed or immediately hammered with further volleys. Instead, a teleportation assault is launched directly onto the ship's bridge, where a group of Astartes level their weapons at Yasugai, who go, "Calm down, put down gun," and then they shoot at him. Because of course they do. To be fair, these are survivors of Istvan. That's one of the things that'll pop up a bit later. This was a good little bait and switch too, by the way, because even Yasugai were like, "These are Sons of Horus. Do not shoot weapons at them." And then it turns out to be loyalists, of course. Yasugai puts them all down with his space magic and humiliates them thoroughly. He looks down at one of the salamanders and, with a quizzical look on his face, just asks him, "Well, what are you doing here? Why are you doing this? Seems a bit hostile, doesn't it?" And the salamander, just confused as hell, doesn't understand what's going on. To be fair, why would the salamanders be so aggressive against the white scars? I get assuming that everyone might be hostile, but you've got no actual proof to be this violent against them. Hell, you could probably even have sent them a communique going like, "Hello, brothers, we need help, come up alongside." And then you could board them. If they agreed, then great. If they didn't, just start shooting them, I guess. But anywho, to be fair, again, they're kind of angry at this point, aren't they? So you can't be too critical of their thinking, I do suppose. The two of them will have a lengthy conversation about what exactly has been happening to the rest of the Imperium, even as the Khan is looking out at the battle line of Alpha Legion in front of him and wondering, much the same as Yasugai, what the fuck is going on? The Alpha Legion have created a cordon, seeming to block the White Scars from the nearest jump point and preventing them from leaving. The Khan and his captains figures that they can probably break through, but alright, say that they break through. Now what? Kill them? Why? They don't know why the Alpha Legion is doing this. Why would they destroy them outright? Are they misguided? Do they know what they're doing? Do we know what we're doing? Which side are they on? Is this some kind of trickery? Etc, etc, etc. And just as the Khan tries to figure out what the hell to do, certainty arrives, in the form of an astro-telepathic message from Lord Dorne, ordering him to return to Terra immediately and completely disregard all other claims to his loyalty, particularly those coming from the War Master. This does two things to the Khan. One, it raises his hackles quite a bit. See, that's an interesting thing too. I like the idea that the Khan is unaware of his own psychic powers to make people overlook him, because he definitely hates being overlooked. And it would also explain his kind of defensive behavior in going like, no, look, this silly game is totally better than that regicide thingy bob, okay? I'm not a savage, please believe me, etc. And he now screams out that he will not take directions from a throne world that only now deigns to remember that it has 18 warrior sons. Clearly referring to the Emperor, then. Could his powers even work on Big E? If so, then that's quite something. But more importantly, he mentions that the Alpha Legion is there, not doing anything, simply just blocking them, keeping them in place. Why? Well, the only reason he can see is that they want them to be here, where communiques can reach them, and they have not provided any counter-argument. If they were there to make him join the War Master, then surely they would be like, "Come here, Khan, look at the mean Imperium, they're bullying our War Master, you must help him, remember, brotherly love and all that." But no communiques whatsoever. They're only providing the Khan with further insecurities, and this kind of unnerving feeling that the Legion is there to intimidate him, corral him, startle him, force him into something. He can then only assume that they are there because they know that this is where he can be reached. The Khan thinks that the Alpha Legion is keeping them there to hear from Dorne. They want him to go to Terra for some strange reason. And this is a theory that will be backed up later, as it turns out that the Alpha Legion had no orders to keep the Khan separate from the rest of the Imperium during this particular point in time. The Khan, smelling something is up, orders the breakout attempt to be prepared and begin as soon as possible. Which in your case means tomorrow, as I will wrap up the first part of the Horus Heresy on book number 28 here. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.